So, using digital tools to enable equity. So, what we're going to cover in this session, we're going to cover some terminology, and we're going to cover some of the tools, techniques, tips, and technical options that allow us to share ideas and communicate effectively at work, with the concentration on those likely to be of interest to those on this call. And we're going to cover, why should you care about this? We're going to talk about an audience-centric approach, and we'll cover options that can help in presentations, documents, numerical presentation, meetings. But I suppose you don't know who I am. So my name's DataGrillen. I've spent 3 decades now getting technology to do interesting things. I've worked in multiple multiple industries. I've tried to get technology to do interesting things for more time than I've been being paid for it, which is great. I've got a personal interest in that, but the thing that I found most helpful and most lasting is actually the people. It's the people that we work with that I get the value out of. Now, about me, I have obviously worked in a number of different industries, but I'm currently working in the energy industry, and I'm leading a digital architecture function for a company called IMServe. You won't have heard about IMServe, but they manage a lot of meters, electricity meters, and meters that generate a lot of data. Often now a reading for every channel in a meter for every half hour, and that's data that underpins how the UK energy industry their billing process works. We're currently taking a leading role in an industry translation from periodic data into a market-wide half-hourly settlement. What that really means is that our next generation of data infrastructure has a lot to deal with, and we're building in security and privacy by design, so getting it right matters. It's certainly keeping me and my team busy at the moment. So let's talk a little bit about disability. And I pulled some numbers here from the World Economic Forum back in July 2021. This isn't a UK thing. It's worldwide. We've got a huge group of people that have disabilities. But diversity is far more than disability. It covers us all. Diversity is about a range. So let's just look at some statistics. So in the UK, there's 16 million people. Almost 1 in 4 of the working age people state they have a disability in the UK. That's according to the Family Resources Survey, which came out from the UK government as a survey they do on the working age population. But interestingly, that 16 million people is actually higher than the worldwide percentage. But thinking about, well, hang on a minute, that's 25% of the working age population, but we don't see that we don't see a visible element of that. So why is that? Well, that's because generally it's reckoned that about 70% of disabilities are hidden, and that means that you wouldn't necessarily know from walking past someone, from talking to someone. And included in that can be elements of mental health, and certainly for those those who do have a disability, we notice that there's an increase in those reporting a mental health impairment, and that's increasing year on year. And 10 to 20% of people are believed to be neurodivergent. Now, what does that mean? Well, we'll come on to it in a bit more detail in a minute, but for the moment, if we just work on the basis that it's a different way of thinking. So those are big numbers, and it sounds like a lot of people. If you imagine if you had an extra 10% from all of your team for free, could engaging appropriately deliver that? What more could you do with that 10%? And the Harvard Business Review found in a study a little while ago that there was indeed a statistically significant relationship between diversity and innovation outcomes, and not just in the UK, across all the countries they examined. And more than that, they found that the more dimensions of diversity that were represented, the stronger that relationship became. In other words, If you can work out how to engage better with people, you can deliver real financial results. And as a byproduct, you have a nicer place to work. Unfortunately, there is no easy answer. It's not a case of being able to say, well, look, this is easy. We can just quickly jump onto it, do dot dot dot, and it's all done. No. What I'm going to run through here are things that I find useful. There's no absolutes. Proper engagement starts with listening, having a conversation, remembering that 70% of disabilities are hidden. That means that actually we need to talk to everyone and understand how people engage better in order that we can then find the right answer, a bespoke answer for each person. So, equity, equality, there's some debate here between these terms and their use. And I pulled up the dictionary definitions, but it's a term that's become quite politicized. There are differences between things. So I thought it'd be helpful for me to explain how I'm using the term in this talk and what it means to me. So an analogy is used sometimes about boxes being placed to enable 3 kids to watch a sport match. Some of you may have been watching a sport match last night. The idea being that if these kids all have the same size box, they can stand on the box and they can see over the fence. All having the same box, that's equality. But hang on a minute, the short kid still can't see over the fence. So if the shorter kid has 2 boxes, the middle kid has 1 box, and the tall kid has no boxes, they can all see. That's giving everyone what they want. My view on this is that rather like the question about whether the glass is half full or half empty, and the optimist says, well, it's half full, and the pessimist says, I know it's half empty, and the engineer comes along and says, you've got the wrong size glass there. I think that, going back to the sporting analogy, if we can point out that actually there's a pile of boxes in the corner there, we can get the right number of boxes to help you. You don't need to worry about what this is doing to other people. That helps enable people to get the box or boxes they need, or not at all, and therefore to engage better. So thinking about some of the barriers that we might face in and about the workplace. So in England and Wales, 9% of people are non-native speakers of English or Welsh. That's a huge number. And in the UK tech sector, there was a study by M3 back in 2023, which found that 9% of people were disabled. Again, a big number. In the Equality Act in the UK, there are 9 protected characteristics. So what's a protected characteristic? It's a thing that you can't discriminate based on. You're not allowed to from a legal perspective. Now, not all of those are disability. So why have I called them out here? Well, it ties to the culture and the ability, therefore, for us to hit a message. So if we think about cultural and cognitive differences, we have different ways of talking to people. We have different ways of thinking. We have different language barriers. Now, why is that a problem? Well, you want people to be able to understand you. We want all our references to be inclusive. We don't just mean inclusive in a gender or sexuality or that sort of sense, but also in the sense of culture. So jargon is something that a lot of industries use. I've certainly been in a number where it can be really, it's perceived as a time saver, but actually what it does is it provides a cultural barrier around those who understand and those who aren't able to keep up. Technology has its share of acronyms, has always loved acronyms, but we also have things like memes that come along, which have a cultural reference to them. So why is that important? Well, if you're concentrating on understanding the terminology, you're not understanding and you're not concentrating on the core message. So what we want to get to is a position where we're able to exchange a message effectively and efficiently. In order to do that, we need to be speaking a common language with common reference points. But let's just take a little bit of a segue here. So an American psychologist, Abraham Maslow, has a theory, or had a theory, did it in the 1950s, about hierarchy of needs. And what it basically says is that the body and the mind recognize the need to get the foundations right, the basics in place, before we can then ascend to fulfill our true potential. So in this context, it means that if we're worried about whether we're fitting in, whether we can actually access that message safely and effectively, then we're not thinking about what that message contains, and we're not able to consider it. And we are hardwired to be wary of being excluded and be worried about it. And that can cut off our thinking at far too basic a level for us to be able to process the message that we're really trying to communicate. So what's diversity then? I thought that's a complicated concept, so we'll ask Copilot. And it came back with this word, variety. And it could go into more detail, but for me, the crux of it is that variety. So why do we want variety? We want it so we can approach things differently. This quote's often attributed to Albert Einstein. The idea that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. There is some doubt as to whether he actually ever said it, but it's a good quote. And it underlines why we want diversity. We want to be able to learn, to grow, to improve. So we need some differences in there in order to get the different results. What about neurodiversity then? So, Copilot, what's neurodiversity? Right, okay. It's a concept. It's about understanding and appreciating the variety. The idea there's no one right way. And I like this quote. You're unique just like everyone else. It's about that diversity that brings creativity, and that allows us to be better at what we're trying to achieve. So what do we mean when we say embrace diversity? Well, we mean, we recognize that different people work in different ways. And people need to be comfortable to be themselves. That gives value to the whole, to allow that self-actualization. And we need to recognize that not everyone's going to receive the message in the same way, and that's okay, as long as you're enabling them to access the message in a way that works for them. It might be worth just discussing briefly the concept of EQ, emotional quotient. It's a concept that a chap called Daniel Goldman has written extensively about. It takes that idea of intelligence quota, the sort of the book learning, if you like, that we tend to find exams are based on, and says, hang on a minute, that's great for proving how much you know. It's not great about getting that message to the next person. That's where the emotional understanding of everyone else comes in. So, all right, we're quarter of an hour in, 20 minutes with the slight technical issue at the beginning. And some of you are probably wondering, well, why do I care? I reckon there's be some people on this call who are identifying with the challenges that we've identified. I think there'll be some people who work with people and say, yeah, no, I think, I recognize some of these traits, or this person has maybe shared that they have particular challenges. And there'll be some people who want to be more effective in what they do. But really, it's about being a better person. And what I mean by that is a more effective person, a better person for a better version of yourself. So communication is about removing any brick walls. It's about how you get your message across and making sure it can then go in. So that's about Can it be understood? And for me, these points are at least as much about the responsibility of the person transmitting the message as the person receiving it. At the end of the presentation, you're going to get a link to submit some feedback on this talk, and I'd certainly welcome your views on how well I'm communicating. So I'll tell you a little bit of a story. So I wear a hearing aid. This is to help me hear better, but it's not the same as the hearing that I once had. And particularly in a noisy environment, it does affect how well I can hear. So I live in a household where another member of that household likes to have background noise on. It's what helps them to concentrate. And this means that I'm often challenged to pick up a message, to receive a message from that person, even sometimes to the point of needing to lip read. I can hear the background noise, the radio that they've got on, but I can't hear the person I'm trying to listen to. I can't get the message. I get the wrong message. And sometimes I nod, smile, and hope the context becomes clear soon. My message isn't going in. Their message isn't going in. And fundamentally, if you can't receive that message, the conversation is pointless. You might as well not have had it. So, thinking about getting the message across. So prior to this, John has just run us through a session on APIs, application programmer interfaces. And we take the idea of checking input data as a given. We're aware of the impact that not doing that can have in terms of bad actors. So why don't we do that in real life communication? Of course, we want to make sure our message can be properly received. And we tend to use checking the inputs as a bit of a protection mechanism to stop the bad actors from putting destructive loads into our systems. But look at this from the sender's perspective. Someone sending you a message wants to be understood, whether in a technical or a person. And having an understanding of how best to engage with that person, how best to receive that message, how best to help them transmit it, very much in evidence. People want to make sure their message can be understood. But people don't have those APIs. An API provides a predictable manual, a set of instructions to allow communication between systems, between applications. People have social, cultural rules and norms, but actually we don't tend to learn them. We tend to dwell on, learn it on the job, as it were. Pick it up as you go along. Understanding how people will receive a message is really down to understanding people, the emotional quotient rather than the intelligence quotient. But we're not all equal. And many of the same tools are helpful for those with and without particular diverse needs. And I found many of these things really helpful myself. I've used a number of them preparing this presentation. And so I'm going to go through some of those in a minute. But in terms of considerations we might have for specific needs, well, we tend to think in terms of disability, diversity as an absolute, something that one either has or hasn't. Well, it's not quite like that. It's more of a scale. We tend to think traditionally about visual loss, but we tend to think of a blind person or person with blindness. We don't think so much about a person with colour blindness or with an impaired ability to see. The same with hearing. When it comes to physical elements, obviously they're far more visible, but actually from a perspective of getting your message across, they're far less important, just because actually that's something that affects a different area of that person's functionality. It's not the same. In the UK, mobility is by far the most prevalent disability, but it's not the most important as far as getting your message across goes. One of the things I would say is that when you're talking about any form of different ability, whether it's a positive or negative, one of the things to remember is that that's the least important thing about that person. It's only important in terms of how you can get the best communication and interaction with that person. So neurodivergency. Here are some neurodivergent cognitive differences. It's a non-exhaustive list. These are particular things, and some of those and other conditions will affect processing speed, ability to process lots of information, data, understand that meaning. Sometimes it depends on the impact to the individual as to whether those are classed as disabilities. So neurodivergent, just to remind you, neurodivergent is different from the norm. Neurodiversity is the entire spectrum, all of us, including those who may not classify themselves as neurodivergent. So broadcast isn't a good way to progress discussion, engagement, or indeed to help your message land. I would encourage anyone who's got questions to put them into the chat or to raise your hand. What we're trying to do is to enable people to be in a better place to respond, to acknowledge your message, to actually take action on the back of it. So how can we do that? So let's look at some tools that can promote that engagement. So we're going to start out looking at tools that can help if you can't see what's going on. Now, that might be due to a sight loss, yes. But it could also be a choice about how to access information, a different way of processing, or even these days, a poor internet connection. So in terms of visual challenges, we probably have heard of screen readers as a concept, but many people won't have used them. There's now a screen reader built into Windows. The other thing is that there's one built into your mobile phone. How many people have used a sort of read this document aloud? Maybe through something like a mobile app, maybe through one of the desktop apps, or you might even find that you've asked Siri or you've asked Alexa or Google to read you a document, to read you emails. Well, that means that's effectively the same process as a screen reader. And one of the main things to consider there is anchor points. I'll come on to that in just a moment in detail. But that's where an object is in the document as far as that reader is concerned. And I would encourage people to use what's called alt text. So it serves two purposes. For the visually impaired, for those who can't see it, for those who are accessing it via a non-visual tool, it allows that tool to explain whether it's a relevant item or not. But for the presenter, I find that useful because if I can't work out what to put in as alt text, that either means I don't understand the object myself, or it's probably decorative. And if I mark it as decorative, great, that can be moved on. But it may be taking up real estate on the screen. Is it something I really need? So it allows me to focus my message. And that, for me, is really helpful. So let's have a little look at this. So what I've got on here is a Word document, which has got some images. I'll put some images into it. And I'm going to ask a screen reader to process through it. And what it's going to do is you'll see the process moving on. But down here, we've got an anchor point for the images. And each of the images are anchored down here. That's not where they appear visually on the screen, but it's where the anchor point is picking it up. So if we let narrator, that's that screen reader built into Windows, read the document, we can see what it's interested in via the blue box. Let's get it to read the first paragraph. So it's reading through and it's skipping over that image. Okay, fine. So it's able to follow that paragraph through. It can read that aloud. You won't be hearing the sound, by the way, but it is reading that sound through. And it's fostering that better communication among colleagues. But it hasn't read the image. It hasn't noticed that. So if we move on to the next paragraph, no, still not read it. What about the bullet point? Oh, now it's jumped back up to the image. So why has it done that? It's done that because of the anchor point. So we need to take that anchor point and we need to move it to understand it better. And obviously the screen reader can carry on and read things. I'm just going to show you the alt text point as well. If we look at the image and if we right click on that image, we can go to view alt text, and you can see I've marked this second image as decorative, which means that the system knows it doesn't need to say anything other than there is a decorative image. If I go to the first image though, I can put some meaningful text in the right hand side. Now, I confess this is not my most meaningful work, but it allows the screen reader to pick up what that is. And if we switch into reading mode, you can see the impact here visually, because those images are showing in line for where they are presenting. So you've got this image now being up at the beginning and that one down here. Why is that? Because we moved the anchor point. So see there, the anchor point is up at the top here, which means that when we're screen reading it, it can better cope with it. Moving the anchor point moves the image. Okay. Having that clarity of flow allows us to make sure that we're able to follow that process through. So what about if you can't hear the message as easily? This can apply to hearing issues. It can apply to language barriers. It can also apply to neurodiverse conditions. So captions. When I think of captions, I think of in terms of the old subtitles that you used to get on the TV, and they were hilarious for live broadcasts. News, sport, they were often an item behind. They didn't always correlate to what was being shown visually, but they've come a long way. So Teams meetings like this one, you can turn on captions within the team. And events are special meetings that are usually done with less control for attendees, but still come with options for accessibility. You have to turn them on in the meeting invite though, and turning them on then allows you to allows attendees to engage better. They can have a live translation. Going back to the point about inclusive language, explaining acronyms, AI-driven captions are hugely better than they used to be. However, they don't understand all of the jargon from your industry. So you need to explain that with that in mind. I talked earlier about captions in MS Teams. Well, there's a caption dialog box, and it looks like this. And we can see up here, you can change the language that your captions will appear in. And you can change the spoken language as well. And yes, there is an English UK as opposed to English. I found better results from English UK. You can set where the captions appear, how large they are. It does take up screen real estate. And so that can create a knock-on problem that then you can't see what's being presented. We'll get onto that in a moment. One thing I would say, captions, we're in a world now that loves the hybrid meeting, where you've got some people who come into the meeting room and you've got some people who are on the screen. If you're in the meeting room, you can still join the virtual meeting. And that means you can access captions. You don't have to join it with audio. You can just join the meeting, turn on the captions. And I've done that in hybrid meetings so that I can have the captions in a live meeting. But it's not just Teams meetings that can get subtitles now. You can get subtitles for in-person meetings. So within the accessibility and slideshow ribbons within PowerPoint, you can turn on subtitles. You can turn on always use subtitles if that's something that's useful to you. And you can change the subtitle language. You do need an active internet connection to work. This to work. They present in the bottom area of the slide, although that can be overruled. So you need to be aware of what's on your slide deck already. They can be turned on prior to presenting, or turned on in a context menu. Or for those who are using the presenter view, you get a little menu like this, and you get a button like that. And that turns on the subtitles. So if I press that button, it says it's starting, it's listening, and then it's starting to present on screen what I'm saying. Now, it can be a bit distracting when you're first used to it. You have to stop looking at it and stop reading what it is you're saying. Otherwise, it's a bit like hearing what you're saying in a meeting. The feedback loop tends to confuse your brain, or at least it does mine. But it's very useful in terms of making your content more accessible. We'll turn that off, but those who want to use subtitles within the Teams meeting, please do. So when we're thinking about meetings, now meetings are events that it's almost become an in-joke about how much value or how little value some people get from some meetings. But a really well-run meeting can pay dividends. So thinking about some of the concepts that we've been discussing, how can we get that best value whilst ensuring that we can benefit from the diversity of approach and thought in that meeting? Well, planning helps. If you can schedule meetings in Teams with an agenda, it allows people to be mentally prepared, not have to react on the moment. I'm sure we've all been to meetings where you've turned up and you thought, why am I here? What's this meeting about? It allows better use of time, better preparation, better prioritization. And that approach is moving on. So it's not just sending an agenda in advance, but we can actually use Loop to allow a level of interactivity. So in this, we're looking at Microsoft Teams, setting up a new meeting. And we can click into the agenda element, and we can type an agenda into the description of the meeting, and that will go to all attendees, no matter whether they're within my organization or without of it. Oh, here's some introductions. We're going to cover how Loop can be useful in a meeting, and as a collaborative tool, and then we're going to ask some questions. Okay, so that can go there, but that's going to be fire and forget. I can't change it without resending the meeting invite, and no one else can add anything to it. But there's this new piece down the bottom here. And if we create an agenda, what's that doing? Well, it's going and creating a loop component, which is a bit of it's a structure in which to put some objects, some text, some tables. And we can put our agenda down into that. Now, what does that do? That shares automatically with all the meeting attendees, which means that they can add things after the invite's been sent. So why is that useful? Well, it takes your any other business, which in some meetings can be half the meeting, and allows people to contribute that up front. So it's not just the meeting organizer who can get across the points to allow others to contribute early, but everyone in that meeting who wants to raise another business can allow that to happen. Loop allows interactivity. It allows those contributions. It allows people to be ready for the meeting, ready for the content. For those who have back-to-back schedules in their diary, I can't help that one, but this allows you to do that preparation in advance. And Loop can be embedded in other workflows as well. You can embed it into Word, email, etc. Not on the in all of the on-prem versions, and it does like an internet connection, but it is useful to be able to reuse the same content. Loop does store some versioning information, but it's not necessarily to the right level to be an authoritative document for an organization, but it allows collaboration to form that authoritative document. It doesn't work for people outside of your organization, and it may be restricted by tenant policies, but you can still use agendas. And thinking up front about what it is you need to communicate and how you're going to do it allows people to have that preparation. And it may even identify meetings that don't need to be meetings at all. When we're thinking about presentations, I'd highlight the accessibility ribbon, which is now within PowerPoint. And that allows you to check that your presentation will come across well. It picks up on all sorts of things. You can check, well, how's this going to appear for someone who can't see all the colors? How's it going to appear? Have I got alternative text right? Have I got the reading order right? Reading order is the order that a screen reader will see things on screen. Is it the same as a visual reader would have? PowerPoint allows you to present to an AI bot, and that allows you to understand, well, look, am I coming up with new content, or am I just reading what's on the screen? So some studies have been done that have identified that actually just reading things off the screen, it tends to be a little bit boring. Now, there are reasons why you might want to do that, and part of that is about inclusivity, to make sure that the key points are available to those who can't access all of your content or who might be looking at the slides later. So with all of these things, it's advice. It's not an absolute. But the rehearsal coach uses that AI to try and identify that, to try and identify where your speech isn't as clear as it might be. That can help you write the notes on your slide. So I covered reading order earlier. And this is one of the slides from earlier with the reading order pane next to it. You can see that some items don't have a tick there. That means they're marked as decorative. But I've been able to put in alternative text for the others. And I've been able to align the reading order with the animation order. So pictures, images, anything that's flat isn't as accessible to all tools. So how do we get from pictures into images? So we can use OneNote to capture things, capture the text. And if I bring OneNote onto the sharing window, one moment. I bring OneNote onto the sharing window, it says. OneNote disappears off my screen. There it is. So here's the same image from earlier. I can't interact with that text at all. But if I copy the text from the picture, I can then paste that text. Now, some of it, your results may vary. Here, clearly, it's pasted quite nicely. This bit, not so well. But it allows me to unflatten images, which is useful. So just on that topic, if you just have a flat object, then any commentary you put around that is your interpretation. There will be some unconscious biases in there. Can't tell you what they are. They're unconscious. But enabling people to use the tools that they have to best engage with it then allows the individuals to pick that up, to work with it, and to get the access to that content best. Sharing to teams. Now, you are viewing my presentation through a shared window. It is possible to use technology in PowerPoint to share directly to teams. Unfortunately, I've not been able to demo that as part of this session. It was one of the technical issues I was having to start with at the beginning, but I will show you a demo of what that looks like. And it allows an engagement from a high contrast view. It allows that translation. It gives the ability for attendees to navigate to other slides. So why is that useful? Well, let's go into it in a bit more detail. Just on sharing though, when you're sharing content from a data governance perspective, I've always found it best to share a window rather than a screen, because if you share a screen and you accidentally flick to some other application, that will appear and be shared as well. Whereas sharing a window only ever shares the window that you have decided to share. So let's have a look at that process. So let's take this slide that we've been looking at earlier, and as you can see, we're bringing in this window down here, and by selecting more applications, I can zoom in. So if I've got subtitles turned on, and that's taking up some real estate, I can still zoom in. If someone's sharing a really high res screen, I can have a look at it, and if I can't see it very well, I can ask PowerPoint and Teams to translate into a high contrast mode. Why is that useful? Makes it easier to see the words. It does take a minute or two to load the first time, but it's loaded that up, having removed all the coloration. Okay, great. But what if I was one of those people who my first language isn't actually English? So we can translate into a whole variety of other languages here. I'm going to pick French. There you go, instant translation. Now, I don't need to do anything to my PowerPoint slide in advance. That's just available. Just need to know to go and access it. Now, unfortunately, my French isn't that great, so I'm going to switch back to the original. So what else do these tools allow me to do? Well, you may have noticed that sync to presenter button there, and that meant it was only happening on my window. It wasn't happening for everyone else. No one else knew I was doing this. I can access previous slides that the presenter has shared in that way. Now, why is that useful? Well, that's useful because if I haven't received a message, I can go back and check it. And that works in high contrast mode, but it also works without that high contrast mode. So you can jump straight to previous screens. You can even jump ahead if you wish. It does have to be enabled by the presenter, but it's usually turned on by default. So that's helpful in terms of allowing people to engage better within Teams meetings. And Teams meetings and Zoom has equivalents. They are becoming the default way of meeting people now in a post-COVID world. So let's look at some AI tools. Teams meetings can have a Copilot summary. That's where Copilot jumps on a meeting and it adds helpful comments. It helps you to run a meeting. It helps you to keep track of what the key salient points are and where are you on the agenda. But if you don't need all of that functionality, a Teams Plus license can still summarize, albeit in arrears. And I found that very useful from the perspective of working out, well, what have I covered? Have I covered everything I need to? And how do we get to the right endpoint? It does require recording and transcription of the meeting, which has some privacy and retention implications. And obviously, part of AI is it is using AI technologies, so you need to be aware of that. What about documents, websites, that sort of thing? Well, AI can help us there too. Organizations may have specific policies on the use of AI, so I would urge you to familiarize yourself with them first. And the aim should always be the spirit as well as the letter of the policy. Sometimes these policies need a discussion about how technology is moving on. Each AI tool may have its own terms. Particularly sensitive can be whether it asserts the right to reuse or train on data that you upload. For this reason, I'd suggest you really understand the context of the learning model you're using. I found it very useful to summarize public content. And going back to the point about culture and breaking that cultural barrier, I found it helpful when working with a new company or industry to make sure I fully understand all of the salient points. So I can go and ask it to provide me a briefing on what does this mean. The ICO has published some guidance on AI use. And I would say that there are some things that AIs are less good at. And some of those are around graphical representations. Yes, there are specialist LLMs that are starting to appear. But the more edge cases particularly need more checking. you can use AI to summarize a URL. Copilot will do that, others will too. ChatGPT, etc. Good for URLs, good for PDFs, good for public content. If you want to get it to summarize something that's within your tenant, then you need to have that capability turned on at a tenant level. And obviously that restricts the learning models that you can submit to. I found it helpful sometimes to get multiple models to give me a summary because they miss things. There's differences between them. And not all AI tools are able to access all content, so it does provide some opportunities there. Power BI, obviously a data representation tool of choice for a number of our people in our industry. It's got accessibility built in, but in fairness, so do most of its competitors, and they follow a general pattern. They divide into things that you get for free. You don't need to do anything to enable. Brilliant. So these are all things that can help people to access your content. There's configurable things like alternative text. We covered that. Tab order. So perhaps time for a little bit of a story here. Back in the dark ages, when mice were uncommon, you used to use tab and shift tab to switch between text fields on the screen. Text-based databases required it, and it carried over into design for Windows, database user interfaces, things like Access and Visual Basic applications. But having those fields in the wrong order caused much frustration. Imagine putting in your first name and then you're asked for your postcode, and then your surname and then your address. You're jumping all over the place. So we're better at it now, but it's one of those things to check because not everyone is using a mouse to navigate. And the other areas, some tips that translate well, whatever you're doing, but particularly for reports and for dashboards. Think about your key message. Keep it simple. Have a check about whether all of your audience can access it. And consider having company checklists or things that you need to check to make sure that you're fully engaging with all of your audience. So to recap, diversity is all around us. That's a good thing. Changing your approach to be inclusive, well, that helps. Lets people engage better. And you can get some productivity for not a lot more effort. Bidirectional communication is the key to engagement. But you don't have to do this all yourself. The technology can help that. But you do have to be mindful of how you're engaging with people. So let's look at some of the tools that we covered. So I've tried to summarize things here, and this won't be everyone's experience. This is my perception. The one I want to really call out here, though, is the impact to the presenter, the person imparting the message. Because I've found these tools very helpful to keep my mind in line, to keep my thoughts accessible, and to make my content more available to those that are receiving that content. And I want to just end with a quote from Hector Minto, who is now the lead technology evangelist at Microsoft. And back in 2018, he said, well, look, the best way to ensure technology can be used by every person is to design it that way from the start. So I would urge you to have a think about how you're communicating before you communicate. So it's not an add-on, it's not an addition afterwards, but it is that design from the start, that built in the same way as we now design in security, and we now design in how we might test things, and we design in all of the sort of the governance elements. Well, actually, accessibility should be part of that. So on that note, thank you very much, and any questions?